Welcome back to Big Book Basic Training. Today we're going to break down the doctor's opinion. The purpose of this chapter is to answer questions like, what exactly is a physical allergy to alcohol? What triggers this physical allergy in an alcoholic? How does someone know whether or not they have this allergy, or how does one diagnose oneself? What is altruism, and why must alcoholics learn to be altruistic if they hope to maintain long-term sobriety? And of course, who was the doctor in the doctor's opinion, and why was his medical opinion on alcoholism so important to recovering alcoholics? The doctor referred to in the doctor's opinion is William D. Silkworth, M.D. As a young intern at Bellevue Hospital in the year 1900, Dr. Silkworth found he was especially drawn to alcoholics and that alcoholics were drawn to him. Over the following decades, his personal modesty, disarming gentleness, and his profound understanding of the disease helped him secure the trust of his alcoholic patients, a vital component needed when working with alcoholics. In the early 1930s, his decades of tireless hard work finally paved the way for a new era that fused medical and spiritual healing. While working with a patient named Bill Wilson at Towns Hospital in New York City, they became aware of and began to apply a practical, workable solution to alcoholism. Centuries of a world without an answer to alcoholism ended when the blueprint for a spiritual experience or spiritual awakening was discovered and applied simultaneously in New York City and Akron, Ohio. By the time Dr. Silkworth wrote his 2 letters included in the doctor's opinion, he had 38 years' experience working with alcoholics, and by this time he had worked with over 40,000 alcoholics. Let's look at the title of the chapter, The Doctor's Opinion. The dictionary definition for a medical opinion is a judgment based on special knowledge and given by an expert, a medical opinion. So, when Dr. Silkworth wrote the 2 letters for this chapter, he was providing his professional medical opinion. His medical opinion was not the same as my opinion or your opinion on alcoholism. It was the opinion of a medical doctor, a doctor with at that time 38 years experience working with alcoholics. Before we get started, it is important to note the first word, we. We is referring to the first 100 people to get sober in AA. These first 100 sober alcoholics collectively wrote the AA Big Book in 1939. At that time, roughly 50 of the original members were living in New York City and 50 were living in Akron, Ohio. It was agreed by this group of 100 that Bill Wilson, who was living in New York City at the time, would write rough drafts of the first 11 chapters of the Big Book, 1 chapter at a time. And when Bill was done writing each chapter, the group in New York would gather, read the chapter sentence by sentence, editing it as they went along. When the group in New York was done editing each chapter in New York, they would then mail their edited version to the group in Akron, so the group in Akron could gather and edit the chapter the exact same way the group in New York edited it, 1 sentence or even 1 word at a time. Dr. Bob, the first person Bill worked with, lived in Akron, Ohio, so Bob was there to facilitate the editing process in Akron, Ohio. They all agreed, when each edited chapter came back from Akron, that the then fully edited version would be the completed chapter. So whenever you see the word we used in the first 164 pages of the Big Book, remember the authors are referring to themselves, the first 100 members of AA who were also the authors of the Big Book. It is important for the readers of the AA Big Book to know who wrote the book, so readers of the book can rest assured that when they work the 12 steps as instructed by the Big Book, they are taking directions directly from the first 100 sober members of AA, the people who had a spiritual experience or spiritual awakening as the result of working the steps, those who documented the instructions for having a spiritual experience. After completing the editing process with the first 11 chapters, they added 42 personal stories to the last half of the book. Then they presented their new book to Dr. Silkworth. Dr. Silkworth read the book. When he was done, he wrote his 2 letters that were included in the doctor's opinion. They started the book with the doctor's opinion because they came to know that when proposing to an alcoholic a spiritual solution for their alcoholism, it is best to start their pitch by having a medical doctor, preferably an MD specializing in alcoholism, break down and explain the hopelessness of their condition and their physical and mental dilemma, just like Dr. Silkworth did with Bill in Towns Hospital in 1934. People typically are not open to applying spiritual solutions to their problems unless the problem is life-threatening, incurable, and there is no other solution to their problem. Having a doctor explain the problem to the patient tends to have a much greater impact than having a person who is not a doctor explain the problem. You will notice in the doctor's opinion there are 2 letters written by the doctor. The first letter endorses AA, and the second letter offers the actual details pertaining to the doctor's medical opinion on alcoholism. With all that said, let's start reading the doctor's opinion. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. The patient the doctor is referring to here in the first letter is Bill Wilson. Notice I underlined the word hopeless. Back in the 1930s, when a patient, in this case Bill, was admitted to Towns Hospital, the patient was asked a series of questions, and then he or she was given a physical medical checkup. Following their checkups and evaluations, the alcoholics were categorized. Unfortunately, most of them fell into the hopeless category, meaning they had basically no chance of recovery because, for the most part up until that time, nothing like AA existed. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. Notice I underlined the word must. In other words, part of Bill's rehabilitation included his presenting his conceptions, at that time the Oxford Group's 6 steps, more on the Oxford Group and the 6 steps later, to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. What has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families? Is that after a person worked the steps, they then showed others how to work the steps, so more people could have the spiritual experience. That's how the fellowship grew. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. Remember, Dr. Silkworth was a full-time doctor at Towns Hospital in New York City. Dr. Silkworth and his staff were always trying different methods on their alcoholic patients. It is estimated at that time the staff at Towns Hospital was successful with approximately 2% of the patients that came to Towns Hospital. Unfortunately, the other 98% were hopeless. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Very truly yours, William D. Silkworth, M.D. So, that concludes the first letter of the doctor's opinion. That was Dr. Silkworth's endorsement of AA. Now the authors, the first 100, speak for a few paragraphs. The physician, who at our request gave us this letter, has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or we were outright mental defectives. These things were true to some extent, in fact to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may of course mean little, but as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. The dictionary definition of allergy states, "Those with allergies to a substance have an abnormal reaction of the body to a previously encountered allergen." Like a person allergic to, say, strawberries, an alcoholic instead has an allergic reaction to alcohol. They have an abnormal reaction of the body when they ingest alcohol. Instead of breaking out in hives or a rash, they break out in craving. They start craving more alcohol. Should they slow down their alcohol intake or run out of alcohol while drinking, this craving for more alcohol will intensify until they put more alcohol in their system. This explains why alcoholics mooch money in drinks when they run out of money or alcohol. If you are not sure whether or not you have cravings when you drink, think back over your drinking career and honestly ask yourself, have I ever started drinking, wanted to stop after an hour or so, yet kept on drinking? This is a question you must ask yourself and answer honestly if you want to diagnose yourself as either an alcoholic or a non-alcoholic. Keep in mind, normal people never start drinking, decide they want to stop drinking for the night, yet continue drinking regardless of their decision to stop, unless someone external to them is, for example, applying peer pressure. Instances like this do not apply. Take a piece of paper and jot down some of the times you started drinking and wanted to stop, yet didn't. It is very important that you do this. Give this some serious thought. You are the only one who can honestly diagnose your condition. It is absolutely imperative you ask yourself this question and answer it. Do I crave alcohol when I drink? Some of my own examples are, I remember being at the main pub in Manchester, Connecticut and borrowing money off a friend to continue drinking. Another time I was at the Hungry Tiger in Manchester and I mooched a beer from an old friend of mine. I even mooched my last drink, a rum and coke. I was at the Coyote Bar in Carlsbad, California with my brother. That was July 18th, 1994. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. In this sentence, notice the phrase, we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane. Here the authors are referring to the alcoholic working out their solution on the spiritual plane, or the work associated with working the first 9 steps, writing inventories, making amends, etc. So the individual completes their first 9 steps to have the necessary spiritual experience. They work out their solution on the spiritual plane. Then, after the individual completes steps 1 through 9, they then set out to work out their solution on the altruistic plane. Specific instructions and directions are given on how to do all of this later in the book. The dictionary definition for altruism is unselfish concern for others. The individual works out their solution on the altruistic plane. In other words, they show other suffering alcoholics how to work the steps so others too can have the necessary spiritual experience or awakening. In doing so, the person guiding learns more about the subject of alcoholism, the solution, or the steps. They learn more about their own condition and how to apply these steps in their own life, and they learn how to effectively help people in the world who want to help themselves. And as they do all of this, their focus is diverted away from themselves, which ultimately gives them relief from their obsession with themselves. Grace and spirit flows to them and through them as they exercise unselfish concern for others. Finally, the phrase, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged, is referring to a patient detoxing, to clear their body and mind so they can pay attention to experienced AA members who are trying to show them how to diagnose themselves and work the program. If a person needs a detox, it is very important they detox under the care of medical professionals, as withdrawal reactions due to physical dependence on alcohol can be fatal. More often than not, it is imperative a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he then has a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. The doctor writes, okay, now we're going to start reading the second letter. The subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. The dictionary definition for the word paramount is chief in importance or impact, supreme, preeminent, a point of paramount significance. In other words, the doctor who had by this time worked with over 40,000 alcoholics, over a period of 38 years who had seen firsthand 98% of alcoholics were hopeless, and that the hopeless 98% never achieve long-term sobriety, considers the subject presented in this book to be chief in importance or impact for those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. Remember, before writing this statement, the doctor had read the chapters written by the first 100 members, and he saw firsthand 100 hopeless alcoholics get sober as the result of working the steps. After 38 years of getting absolutely nowhere with hopeless alcoholics, the impression his first 100 members of AA made on him cannot be overstated. He saw miracles taking place at Towns Hospital, and he had no problem risking his reputation in sharing what he saw. Dr. Silkworth refers to the Big Book as having covered alcoholism in such masterly detail. The AA Big Book explained the alcoholic's problem and the directions and instructions for how to have a spiritual experience in masterly detail, something neither he nor anyone else had ever seen before. We doctors have realized for some time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. The dictionary definition for the word moral is of, pertaining to, or concerned with the principles or rules of right conduct, or the distinction between right and wrong, ethical, moral attitudes. The dictionary definition for the word psychology is the science of the mind or of mental states and processes. The first and most important issue the doctor focuses on when giving his professional medical opinion concerning alcoholism is that for some time, doctors have known that although alcoholics know the difference between right and wrong, they tend to lean toward doing the wrong things in life when given the choice between doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing. This harmful leaning mental condition and its misdirected processes lead to unethical behavior, which lead to mounting guilt, and eventually insurmountable shame and guilt. The alcoholic's shame and guilt leads to more drinking, and their drinking brings with it more problematic behavior, and their bad behavior brings on more and more shame and guilt. If sobriety is to be achieved, this downward spiral must be stopped and reversed, and the alcoholic's entire self-destructive thought system must be recognized as a major part of the problem. And this self-destructive thought system must be replaced with a thought system void of shameful, guilt-ridden memories and their subsequent behavior. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Dr. Silkworth knew that getting alcoholics to not only stop drinking, but to get them to recognize and break their self-destructive thought processes and bad behavior patterns was critical to guiding them out of their shameful, guilt-ridden mental darkness into an enlightened, guiltless state of mind. For decades, he and his team tried to help their alcoholic patients heal their minds and get them to see themselves differently. But neither he nor any other doctor knew of a way to get them to permanently break through and heal their overbearing sense of guilt and their bad habits of thought and behavior. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book, Bill, came under our care in this hospital, and while here he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. Notice Bill put these ideas into practical application at once. He did not wait a week or a month to work the steps or carry the message. Bill worked the steps with Ebby in his hospital room in Towns Hospital shortly after detoxing. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving we consented. Shortly after Bill left Towns Hospital, he returned and asked Dr. Silkworth to let him work with some of Dr. Silkworth's hopeless patients. Dr. Silkworth agreed to let Bill work with some of the hopeless patients, knowing he really had nothing to lose. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men, as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. When Dr. Silkworth saw the formerly hopeless alcoholics start behaving unselfishly toward one another and remaining that way, He was astounded to see someone had finally found a way to get them to break through and recognize their selfishness and to ultimately reverse their selfish predispositions. They believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. An alcoholic's physical craving for liquor is completely removed during detox. It is important to clear their body and mind so they can pay attention to those who would help them. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. This means that because I am an alcoholic, I am allergic to alcohol, and therefore I will never be able to drink alcohol without having an allergic reaction to it when I start drinking it. Every time I start drinking, I will crave more alcohol. To permanently avoid having this allergic reaction to alcohol, I must never drink alcohol again. Normal non-alcoholic people are not allergic to alcohol, so they never have this allergic reaction, so they never crave alcohol when they drink it. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. This means that once a person becomes an alcoholic, they will always be an alcoholic. Once they become a pickle, they can never go back to being a cucumber. They will be allergic to alcohol for the rest of their lives. They will never be able to drink without having an allergic reaction or craving. Alcoholics always crave more alcohol when they start drinking. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The dictionary definition for the word frothy is unsubstantial. So when trying to help alcoholics achieve long-term sobriety, unsubstantial, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. The dictionary definition for the word depth is 1. Complexity or obscurity, as of a complex or obscure subject, a question of great depth. 2. Gravity, seriousness. Therefore, depth in this context means complex, obscure, and very serious. The dictionary definition for the word weight is importance or consequence, a matter of great weight. The dictionary definition for the word message is a communication delivered in writing. Alcoholics need something more than frothy, unsubstantial emotional appeal to overcome alcoholism. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In many circumstances, an alcoholic's working with a professional therapist is essential in helping the alcoholic work through some of their additional psychological or emotional problems. But working with a professional in itself is not enough to help an alcoholic achieve long-term sobriety. More so, the point the doctor wants to make clear is, hanging out at AA meetings is a very good idea for any alcoholic, but sharing and listening at meetings will not help an alcoholic to achieve sobriety. Sobriety in this context means the alcoholic has had a spiritual experience, is growing their spiritual experience, and in having done so, has recovered, or more specifically, no longer has what is referred to later in the book as still having an alcoholic mind. Dr. Silkworth saw the hopeless patients at Towns Hospital writing deep, extensive, substantial, weighty inventories. Dr. Silkworth learned that thorough inventory writing was an essential component in the recipe that leads to the essential effective spiritual experience. Depth in the preceding statement refers to the inventories going deep, and weight refers to a lot of going deep when writing inventories. The word message is referring to the message or recipe described in the Big Book. The message, delivered in writing via the Big Book, is meant to be delivered to a suffering alcoholic from an experienced alcoholic, one who has had the spiritual experience or spiritual awakening as the result of working the steps. Like a cookbook with written recipes in it, the Big Book carries the recipe for a spiritual experience or spiritual awakening. No other book carries such a message or recipe. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. If any feel that as psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us a while on the firing line. See the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work and even of their sleeping moments, and the most cynical will not wonder that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. We feel, after many years of experience, that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Alcoholics drink for effect. The dictionary definition of the word effect is accomplishment, fulfillment. Alcoholics drink to accomplish something. They drink for fulfillment. Non-alcoholics drink recreationally. Non-alcoholics do not drink for effect or to accomplish something or for outright total fulfillment. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. Although they know when they drink they hurt others and themselves, they completely lose sight of this fact when their alcoholic craving and obsession sets in after they start drinking. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity. Drinking with impunity means drinking without consequence. Most alcoholics often experience negative consequences as a result of their drinking. Normal non-alcoholic people ordinarily drink without consequence. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. What AA refers to as a spiritual experience, Dr. Silkworth calls an entire psychic change. After decades of watching hopeless alcoholics get locked up, go insane, and die from the disease, Dr. Silkworth knew that unless an alcoholic could experience an entire psychic change, there was very little hope of his recovery. On the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. Notice that what AA calls suggestions, Dr. Silkworth calls simple rules. Although Dr. Silkworth is aware that, in general, alcoholics dislike rules, he does not refrain from using the word rules when giving his professional medical opinion. Men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal, "Doctor, I cannot go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me." Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I have had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favorable to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to that date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape, they were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. There are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. Keep in mind Dr. Silkworth is a doctor who carries out the duties of his job methodically. Classifying alcoholics is a part of the doctor's job, so he mentions his findings. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions but never a decision. There is the type of man who is unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. There is the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. There is the manic-depressive type, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends, and about whom a whole chapter could be written. Then there are types entirely normal in every respect except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. All of these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. So, if for example you went to a party with say 20 alcoholics, you would most likely see some of them fighting, some of them chasing each other around, some looking for their keys so they could go for a joyride, some crying, some laughing, and so on. And although they would all be behaving differently in many respects, they would all have one symptom in common. They would all be craving more alcohol. It has never been by any treatment with which we are familiar permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. The dictionary definition of the word abstinence is 1. The act or practice of refraining from indulging an appetite or desire, especially for alcoholic drink. 2. The state of being without a drug, as alcohol or heroin, on which one is dependent. Entire abstinence means alcoholics must never drink again. That is, if they hope to avoid experiencing the allergic reaction with its attendant cravings. This immediately precipitates us into a seething cauldron of debate. Much has been written pro and con, but among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. So when it came to doctors in 1939, their general professional medical opinion seemed to be that most chronic alcoholics were doomed. What is the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, detox, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. He worked the steps. 1 year later he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partially recognized his features. But there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. To me he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis, and deciding his situation hopeless, had hidden in a deserted barn determined to die. He was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment a waste of effort unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology, and we doubted if even that would have any effect. However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. He worked the steps. He has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he is as fine a specimen of manhood as one could wish to meet. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through, and though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray. William D. Silkworth, M.D.